Just southwest of Chicago, a street leaves the city to run through the outlying industrial towns of Bedford Park and Summit, into villages further south, and the heavily forested Palos Division of the Forest Preserve District of Cook County. It is an old road, originally a Native American trail, with its origins on the shore of Lake Michigan, in Chicago's present-day Chinatown. The road takes its name from one of the most important events in American history, and runs true through the imaginations of many, both skeptics and believers. For there is a magic along its path which generations have longed to hold, or tried to dispel. It's a highway populated with ghosts, and a road flooded with the tears of laborers, murder victims, and the countless mourners who have carried their dead to the 7 cemeteries which flank it. That old road has established itself as no less than the magnetic center of Chicago's supernatural forces, and it is known today as one of the most haunted roads on Earth. That road is Archer Avenue. The anchor of Archer Avenue's preternatural notoriety is a bluffside church and burial ground near south suburban Lamont. It is the oldest established cemetery in the county, and its point seems to mark the southern end of the haunted portion of Archer Avenue, just north of the old Sag Quarries. While a picture of this setting could grace an Irish postcard, there is much more here than meets the eye. Like Archer Avenue itself, this parish and its cemetery date to the early 1800s, when Irish cannelers, most of them from the town of Bridgeport, now part of Chicago, put down this road along the route of the Illinois and Michigan Canal under the direction of Colonel William B. Archer. Construction of the canal, financially cursed from the outset, resulted in frequent periods of unemployment for the would-be workers, who often labored under slave-like conditions, thirst and hunger, disease, infighting, and death. Nonetheless, they built the road and they built the canal, and many of them moved southwest of the city to live and die along Archer Avenue, and ultimately to be buried in the cemetery that sprouted here, a churchyard called St. James of Sag Bridge, or simply St. James Sag. Legends abound regarding the sacred nature of this site, which was reportedly a French signal fort in the days of French exploration of the American interior, a site where Father Marquette and Louis Joliet stopped on their travels to celebrate Mass. An earlier Catholic church stood here in those days, replaced later by the current limestone structure, the cornerstone of which was laid in 1853 and which took local men 6 years to complete. Workers had to bring limestone from the Sag Quarries south of the site to build the structure. Legend says that during the building of the I&M Canal, poor cannelers who died without funds for a proper burial were cremated, with their ashes scattered over these quarries. Tradition has long held that an Indian burial ground preceded the European burial ground here, another possibility often brought to explain the site's impressive host of hauntings. In the 1880s, St. James pastor Father Joseph Bowman reported that it was common for him to look out of the old rectory windows to see the grounds of the churchyard rising and falling as if the ground were breathing. Local historian Pat Camilleri uncovered ghost stories which told of sightings of Indians on horseback in this area, possibly tied to the discovery of Indian skeletons on a local farmer's land in the late 19th century. Though the farmer protested, archaeologists from Chicago's Field Columbian Museum of Natural History removed the skeletons and placed them into the museum's collections. Kelly had warned the archaeologists that he had previously found an Indian skeleton on his land and brought it into his house, for which he was punished with ghostly footsteps, voices, and the movement of objects. An earlier church hall which stood here years ago with a castellated roof helped to gain the site the name of Monk's Castle in local ghost lore, as sightings of phantom monks here date back to 1847, when shadowy, robed figures were first seen gliding up the bluff. 130 years later, in November of 1977, a Cook County sheriff was passing the grounds late one night and reportedly saw 8 hooded figures floating from the adjacent woods toward the rectory. As he pursued what he assumed to be pranksters, the figures moved towards the top of the hill and vanished. Late in September of 1897, a church picnic was held on the grounds here. Chicago musicians William Looney and John Kelly came to provide harp and flute music for the event. After the affair, exhausted from the long night of playing to a good crowd, the 2 musicians decided to bed down in the upper floor of the social hall at the foot of the hill, rather than risk the late drive back to the city. Settling in on bedrolls sometime after 1 o'clock in the morning, the 2 looked forward to a sound sleep. But for Looney, sleep wouldn't come. The chilly night and the bright moonlight kept the musician tossing and turning until he was alerted to a commotion outside, the unmistakable galloping and rumbling of a horse and carriage. Curious about the frantic nature of the sound, Looney ran to the window to observe the scene. But although the sound from the road continued with increasing strength, no horse or carriage could be seen. Perplexed and quite shaken, Looney awakened his friend and told him of the incident. But as he told his tale, the sound began again, growing in strength as before. This time, both men stood at the window, searching the landscape for a sign of the carriage. What they finally saw was something quite unexpected. In the middle of the road stood a tall young woman in white. Her hands were raised and moving above her head of tangled dark hair. The men were on the verge of calling out to her when, to their shock, she floated through the cemetery fence and began wandering around the tombstones. At last, the sound produced a visual counterpart as the musicians watched the approach of galloping horses, which were, in their words, snow white and covered with fine netting. A light of electric brilliance shone from the forehead of each. The animals preceded a carriage, a dark vehicle of solemn outline. No driver could be seen. Then, as the carriage whipped past her, a shadow enveloped her, and she began sinking into the center until she was swallowed up. The men even took their experience to the police, who, amazingly, believed them. Some legends maintain that the haunting scene witnessed by Looney and Kelly in 1897 was the result of an elopement attempt gone awry. According to lore, a young man came to St. James in the 1880s to serve as assistant to the pastor and shortly won the affections of one of the pastor's housekeepers. Unable to fight their feelings for one another, the couple decided to run away and be married. Late one night, the young man hitched up the team of horses and advised his fiancée to await him halfway down the hill. As the young man stepped down to help her board the carriage, however, the animals suddenly bolted. Tragically, the carriage overturned on top of the couple. They were both crushed by the weight and buried together in an unmarked plot here at St. James. The thrilling stories of St. James made it a natural attraction for local teenagers who have flocked to the site for generations under cover of darkness, hoping for a glimpse of the phantom monks here at Monk's Castle and other wraiths of legend. Locals tell that the late-night expeditions became so bothersome at one point that priests serving at the parish took to dressing up in robes to chase the encroachers away. Some say that, when caught, these trespassers were forced to kneel on broom handles or stones for hours in penance for their offense. There is still one more ghostly reality here at St. James Sag. The front gates, which stand here today, previously stood at the entrance of the Hawthorne Works, the plant which employed the majority of the victims of Chicago's Eastland disaster of 1915, the deadly river tragedy which took the lives of 844 souls. It is worth noting that the now vanished Sag Bridge community and the still vibrant village of Lamont hosted two other harrowing ghost stories dating to the 19th century. In 1873, a horrific accident near the Chicago-Alton Railroad Bridge led to the deaths of 11 passengers and crew when a passenger train and a freight train collided. The site of the accident was for years the scene of ghostly encounters at the old water stop each night, where phantoms were reported looking into the windows of the train cars and climbing onto the engine, or wandering around the fields on either side of the dark tracks. In 1901, a demon descended upon an unsuspecting farm family in Lamont when for months mysterious and threatening letters dropped out of thin air in the family home, leading to an exorcism attempt by local priest Father Westarp, the then pastor of local St. Alphonsus Church. Many locals believed it was witchcraft which had brought on the infestation, as a mysterious black cat had appeared on the premises and stayed for the duration of the plague. A chain-link fence separates St. James Sag from Redgate Woods, a dense preserve popular with hikers, birders, and mountain bikers, the latter of whom enjoy the steeper climbs of the bluff-side enclosure. These woods have long been known as haunted, running as they do along notorious Archer Avenue. It is these woods that shiver with the chanting of an invisible chorus, and these woods that host apparitions of monks seen both here and at the adjacent churchyard of St. James Sag. It has been ventured that the haunting of Redgate Woods may be connected to gangland days, when neighboring homes and businesses were joined by long underground tunnels for use during the Prohibition era. According to some tales, a number of such tunnels still run to remote areas like Redgate Woods from roadhouses as much as a mile away. History may never verify these events, but one other much stranger reality cannot be denied. That is, that the world's first nuclear reactor is buried here at Redgate Woods. To this day, the reactor reposes under the forested landscape high on the bluff along Archer. In fact, nuclear engineers from the nearby Argonne National Laboratory are in charge of environmental monitoring of the woods for the U.S. Department of Energy. Argonne, which sprawls over more than 1,500 acres nearby, was the nation's first national laboratory, having been chartered in 1946. Argonne's mission began with the Manhattan Project, the monumental World War II venture which saw its success at the University of Chicago when Enrico Fermi and more than 46 colleagues accomplished the world's first controlled nuclear chain reaction. When the war ended, Argonne was founded to develop nuclear reactor sites for peaceful use. Redgate Woods had already been established at the time of Argonne's founding, and the new laboratory was naturally put in charge of it at once. The University of Chicago reactor, known as Chicago Pile 1, was moved after the war to Redgate Woods to be buried next to Chicago Pile 2, which was developed at Redgate itself. While the area is consistently declared safe, there may be a very good reason why paranormal tools go a bit out of whack when taken here, as indeed they do. In fact, the presence of the reactors may even explain some of the paranormal phenomena experienced here, including apparitional sights and sounds, perhaps given life by the long-buried energy at this storied site. This dark stretch of Archer, north of Redgate Woods, has been christened the Stretch of Death by local paranormal investigator Edward Shanahan for the countless deaths which have occurred from car accidents along this winding road. As you travel the storied region, you'll see the roadside dotted with their memorials. Maple Lake, the largest of the many area bodies of water in the Archer Avenue Triangle, is a popular spot for picnicking, fishing, and ghost hunting. For generations, the 95th Street overlook of the lake has been a magnet for those in search of a glimpse of one of the world's most famous ghost lights, a luminescent ball known to dart among the trees and over the water, thrilling all who are lucky enough to see it. Some tie the light to a well accident that occurred many years ago on the opposite shore, while others believe the light may be connected to the nuclear reactors buried at nearby Redgate Woods. This structure, first called the O. Henry Roadhouse when it was completed around 1917, has been connected in folklore to gangland activity for generations, though some locals dispute those ties. Like many establishments in Willow Springs, a former hotbed of organized crime, tunnels led from the Irish legend basement to other buildings in the area, including old farmhouses, the Willowbrook Ballroom, and even, according to an old unsubstantiated legend, the family crypt of the White family at nearby Fairmount Hills Cemetery. A previous owner told me years ago that at one time Al Capone himself sent across to the Willowbrook to borrow some construction workers to pour concrete in the basement of the now Irish legend. They were sworn to secrecy as to what work they did at the old roadhouse. But in 1997, when I visited again with a psychic medium, she told me that there were dozens of bodies buried under the floor here. A later owner told me that when he bought the property and tore up the old driveway to make the patio, he found paint cans filled with $100 bills under the old driveway stones. Another medium told me that the little boy called Adam, often seen on the premises, was the child of one of the many prostitutes who worked here, and that the woods are filled with the graves of babies. She said that the combination of Indian mounds, the graves of the children, and the gangland violence was a paranormally volatile combination, fueled by the bad energy of prostitution, drinking, and gambling, which she said intensified the ghostly activity by attracting human spirits who had been addicted to these earthly vices in life. A woman also is said to haunt here. They call her Isabel, and she is tied to an elegant portrait of a woman which was found on the property many years ago. She has been frequently seen in the upstairs rooms, as well as in the woman's bathroom in the restaurant. Here stand the sad ruins of the legendary Willowbrook Ballroom, one of the most beloved dance halls in American history, and one of the last in operation when it burned to the ground in October of 2016. The Willowbrook hosted some of the biggest swing bands and orchestras of the era, and until the end, hosted ballroom dancing, swing dance parties, country western dances, and concerts, as well as frequent weddings and funeral luncheons. Ghosts attended many of these popular events, with dark figures, full-bodied apparitions, phantom music, and the sweet smell of perfume reported by guests over many years. No other phantom, however, can match the fame, of the Willowbrook's most famous ghost, the world-famous specter known as Resurrection Mary. Chicago's vanishing hitchhiker, Mary was a young girl whose story we will revisit shortly, who is said to have danced her last dance here in the 1930s before being killed in an automobile accident later that night when her impromptu escort attempted to drive her home. Dancing with her, men would report that she was cold to the touch and chilly in demeanor as well, until closing time came and she'd suddenly, animatedly beg for a ride home. En route to her home, however, usually given as an address in the back of the yard's Stockyards district of Chicago, the girl would vanish from the car. Generations of drivers along Archer Avenue have claimed to see her, or even pick her up on the dark road in the wee hours of the morning since then, only to have her disappear time and time again. Strange events have been recorded just outside the Archer Avenue boundary of the Archer Avenue Triangle, over the Aenue Canal and the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. Diane Masters, a local woman, disappeared in March of 1982 after a late-night meeting of the Board of Trustees of nearby Moraine Valley Community College. Her body was later found in a car submerged in the Ship Canal. Her husband, a prominent local attorney, only admitted to masterminding her disappearance just before his own death in recent years. Some have claimed that the ghost of Diane Masters still haunts the area and that she has been seen prominently at the fire station in Willow Springs. A month-long search for two missing Chicago girls ended here on German Church Road. It was on December 28th, in 1956, that Patricia and Barbara Grimes, aged 13 and 15, left their home at 3624 South Damon Avenue, headed for the Brighton Theater, only a mile away. Having planned to spend an evening watching a new Elvis Presley movie, the girls would instead go missing for 27 agonizing days, until their nude, frozen bodies were found here, on the bank of Devil's Creek in southwest Cook County. This part of German Church Road, where the Grimes sisters' bodies were found, is alleged to replay the last act of the murders. Since the discovery of the bodies in January of 1957, Cook County police have received reports from those claiming to have heard cars pull up at the site, and to have distinguished the sound of something being dumped in the road without any car or person in sight. This area does not host only sorrow. Tucked into a modern subdivision nearby is an ancient Native American sacred site, the tranquil oasis known as Indian Healing Waters. Long ago, the Mascoutin tribe considered this extremely sacred ground and kept an eternal flame burning within a circle of boulders, which also lit the way for pilgrims who came here to be healed by the waters of the spring, believed to perform miracles on the sick and the dying. Local kids have long called the unusual Swedish Gothic house on the Willow Springs Bluff the House of the Devil. But this once dilapidated structure is now being lovingly rehabilitated. The house's owner was no devil, but the Lithuanian artist Vladas Vaidakūnas, who once opened up his home for a gorgeous art show of his most renowned works. Despite his accomplishments, however, Vaidakūnas is best known by local teens for an old legend still attached to him, that he would chase off curiosity seekers at night with a shotgun. At the intersection of Archer Avenue and Willow Springs Road sprawls the Old Willow Shopping Center. Resurrection Mary herself was famously picked up at this intersection one blustery night long ago, only to vanish from the car as it passed Resurrection Cemetery further up the road. This shopping village was long believed to be cursed, as it was built on the ridge known to be a lively Native American community at one time. Though today, a number of small shops flourish here, in the courtyard of the upper shops, visitors have claimed to see a wide variety of apparitions, including what are described as half-human, half-animal creatures, the phantoms of children, and an Indian on horseback. The most famous hauntings here are those at the popular Ashbury Coffee House, the southernmost anchor of the development. The sound of a woman screaming can be heard in the upstairs rooms, and a variety of haunting phenomena have been reported by staff and guests alike in the lively cafe. Most wonderfully, the ghost of famed late ghost hunter Richard Crowe has been seen here since his death in 2012. Crowe brought countless tours into the Ashbury before his passing that June, and his imposing figure has been seen sweeping through the first floor and up the stairs on more than one occasion. The year after Crowe's death, paranormal researcher Dr. Chuck Kennedy recorded electronic voice phenomena here, which seemed to contain the voice of Richard Crowe, verifying that after death, he had personally met Resurrection Mary, his favorite phantom. Crowe is interred at Resurrection with her. Archer Avenue is the hypotenuse side of what ghost lorist Michael Klein has called the Archer Avenue Triangle, the densely forested area which hosts the myriad phenomena of this ethereal region. Another side of that triangle is Keene Avenue, and natives of this area speak equally of the ghosts of Keene, a darker, eerier, and more isolated road than Archer by far. Some years ago, this road, dotted with horse stables and honky-tonk, now biker bars, was the place where teenagers flocked in search of the sobbing woman, a banshee-like figure seen to wander out of the trees at Buffalo Woods Forest Preserve. A figure reminiscent of Irish lore, the woman is said to emerge from the trees into the moonlight to cross Keene Avenue with head and hands, passing through the fence to a strangely chaotic cemetery behind, Archer Woods. Today, Archer Woods has no fence at all, but even before it was removed in recent years, the gate was almost always left open at night, drawing a steady stream of ghost hunters. A walk through the grounds reveals a strange fact. Whereas in most Christian cemeteries the graves are arranged that the interred face east toward the rising sun as symbolic of the resurrection of Christ, the graves at Archer Woods are plotted every which way, giving rise to the belief among some researchers that this disorder has led, in turn, to unrest among the dead here. In mid-century, the Cook County Coroner's Office discovered that 2 local undertakers had buried 5 indigent men nearly naked and unembalmed after being paid by the county to provide a proper and dignified burial for the men. Still, after the dust from the court case settled, the county seemed unfazed. The coroner continued to send indigent dead here for interment, making no effort to hide the fact that these poor were buried in ditches and in unmarked graves. Feelings of unease seem to stalk many visitors here, who say they feel watched or followed when wandering these grounds. Touches on the arm or whispers in the ear are common, as are strange lights seen at night. In the early 2000s, an Elgin woman was visiting the cemetery on a paranormal investigation and was chased by what she described as a black mass, which pursued her clear across the grounds to Keene Avenue from where the incident began, a distance of almost a city block. More than one visitor has reported the sound of organ music, coming from an unusual funerary monument in the cemetery which resembles a pipe organ, including an Ohio man named Michael Flagg, himself a church organist, who said he heard the strains of "How Great Thou Art" while visiting the cemetery for genealogical purposes in 1999. This part of Keene Avenue also carries the memory of a bizarre incident connected to one of the world's most famous haunted places, the little cemetery known as Bachelor's Grove, situated in a forest preserve some miles from here. In January of 1989, a man named Martin Myers ran over a romantic rival on this lonely stretch of road, ramming him head-on with his pickup truck. Both men had been on their way to the popular biker bar Cece's Grove. Later that year, Myers, who was about to be tried for first-degree murder, was found shot to death near the entrance to Bachelor's Grove. In August of 1975, a Palos Hills girl was crossing the old equestrian path across 95th Street near Keene Avenue when she and her horse were struck by a car driven by a man from nearby Bridgeview. Both the girl and the animal were killed when the horse was thrown 25 feet and the girl 35 feet. In recent years, drivers through this old crossing have reported seeing the images of horses and their riders making their way over the modern road without a sound and disappearing without a trace. Some link these phantoms to the tragedy of 1975, while others have unearthed another possibility. Chicago area ghost hunter Richard Crow, who lived in the area, found that some time ago a nearby stable had been closed down due to the owner's neglect. As a result, many of the stable's horses were put down. The stable was located a mere block from the crossing. Less than a mile from the ghostly horse crossing at 95th Street is another infamous accident site, this one of legend alone, at least for now. The tragedy is said to have occurred near Sacred Heart Cemetery at 101st Street in the 1950s, when a young couple allegedly perished in a crash during an afternoon drive through the Palos Preserves. Their baby, unrestrained according to the practices of the time, was thrown from the car into the adjoining woods. Though the families of the couple frantically alerted police to the missing child, an extensive search turned up no trace of the baby. Years later, reports began to circulate of a strange creature glimpsed by motorists along Keene Avenue, a childlike figure, human in every way, except for one. A sheen of gray hair covered its entire body. As the years went by, reports of the so-called gray-haired baby turned into those of the Keene Avenue werewolf, presumably after the long-lost child had grown to manhood in the dense preserves of southwest Chicago. Tales of a hairy man-beast dashing through car headlights joined equestrian accounts of horses spooked by unseen figures on the horse paths. Some local residents don't believe their local werewolf was the grown-up gray-haired baby at all, but an actual local victim of lycanthropy, or the psychological werewolf disease. This developing strip mall was the site of an old motel-style apartment building, which was long rumored to be haunted and the subject of numerous paranormal investigations. Some years ago, a possible ghost was identified when a tombstone was discovered under some foliage near the parking lot. The grave marker of one August Boness remained here for quite some time, but then disappeared when the building was demolished to make way for the commercial development here. Paranormal historians such as myself wondered and worried about the fate of the stone and about whether the body of Mr. Boness remained behind after the area in question was paved. Happily, though, local researcher Ray Johnson discovered that August's body is actually interred at Bethania Cemetery across the road and never reposed here at all. Only the stone was displaced. That stone, Johnson verifies, is now in the care of a local historical society. As for the identity of the ghost or ghosts here, that still remains a mystery. Bethania Cemetery and Resurrection Cemetery sprawl side by side along Archer between 88th Avenue and Roberts Road. Though less famously haunted than Resurrection, Bethania has had sightings erupt over the years of either an old man or of hooded, robed figures around a bonfire along the fence line. Some have reported that they see the old man raking and burning leaves in the autumn time. Chet's Melody Lounge sits bravely on Archer Avenue, across the road from Resurrection Cemetery. It is a favorite spot of both locals and ghost hunters, the latter of whom come from all over the world in search of the elusive phantom, Resurrection Mary. The drink of choice for ghost hunters, of course, is the Bloody Mary, and it is traditional here to order two, one for you and one for Mary, as she was known to come in here one night many years ago after a cab driver dropped her off outside. Time and time again, drivers along Archer have rushed into the bar to report that they have hit a girl on the road, feeling the impact of their vehicle striking the body, but that the body had disappeared on impact. Mary is not alone in her haunting of Chet's. The owners have long reported the spirit of a man named Ben in the basement, a shadowy figure who lingers near the men's room in the bar, and the laughter of children heard echoing through the building. Few cemeteries on earth thrill ghost hunters as much as this one. Resurrection Cemetery, the home of Chicago's world-famous vanishing hitchhiker, the beautiful dancer known as Resurrection Mary. Though Resurrection Mary's spirit has contented itself with the haunting of this stretch of Archer Avenue, the image of this elusive personality has thumbed its way into the hearts and history of all Chicago. From the old-timers' still vibrant accounts of her to the young Chicago rap artists singing about Res Mary, the specter's appeal reaches every generation, and with good reason. For almost a century, travelers along Archer Avenue have reported enigmatic encounters with a single-minded young woman in a white dress who seems as real as can be until she proves herself decidedly otherwise. Many have wondered about the identity of this elusive spirit. For years, the strongest claim was that she was in life Mary Bregovy, a young factory worker from back of the yards who died in an accident in the spring of 1934 when the car she was riding in struck an I-beam of the Lake Street elevated train near the Chicago River downtown. Mary, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, went through the window and died. She was waked at the Satala Funeral Home on Damon Avenue, just down the street from her own house. This wasn't the last time tragedy would visit the Bregovies. Years after Mary's death, her father, Stephen, remarried. The year after the wedding, he hanged himself in the garage of the family home. Other candidates have emerged over the years as well, including a girl named Mary Moskowski, another named Mary Kovach, and still others. Their story is championed by the locals whose neighborhoods and parishes claim her as their own. After the publication of my book, Chicago Haunts, in 1997, I was contacted by a gentleman named Frank Andrajasic, who lived in Bedford Park, a village just north of Resurrection Cemetery. Frank told me that parishioners at his parish of St. Joseph in nearby Summit had shared with him their belief that the Archer Avenue hitchhiker had been, in life, a young Lithuanian girl who'd attended the parish church and school in the 1920s. Anna Maria Norkus, a vivacious adolescent, died on the eve of her 13th birthday in 1927, leaving her distraught father behind to blame himself to the grave. He had taken her out dancing to the O. Henry Ballroom as a birthday surprise. But something happened that night which led father and daughter to go in the wee hours to a local police station to bond someone out of jail. On the way, the car plunged into an unmarked railroad cut in the dark. Anna died instantly. Anna's photo, which appeared on the second edition of Chicago Haunts, brought no less than 9 men to contact me over the years, claiming that it was this young girl, and not an older woman, who they saw or picked up along Archer Avenue over a wide span of years. In 1973, the same year Mary took a cab to Chet's Melody Lounge and vanished, Mary is believed to have shown up at least twice in 1 month at a far southwest side dance club called Harlow's at 8058 South Cicero Avenue, wearing a dress that looked like a faded wedding gown. A Harlow's manager described her as having big, spoolie curls coming down from a high forehead. She was really pale, like she had powdered her face and body. Dancing alone in an off-the-wall fashion, the girl was as obvious as could be, yet despite bouncers at the door who carted all of the guests, no one ever saw her come in or leave. Most famously, in 1970, a driver happened to be passing Resurrection Cemetery one night when he glimpsed a young woman standing on the other side of the front gates, clutching the bars. Worried that someone had been locked inside after closing, the man hurried to report the incident to the local police, who hastened to rescue the reluctant prisoner. Upon their arrival, however, they found the cemetery deserted, but their inspection of the gates revealed a chilling spectacle. Not only had 2 of the bars been pried apart, mangled and burned as if by some incredible force and heat, but the impression of a pair of delicate hands remained behind, so precise it was claimed you could see the fingerprints burned into the metal. Despite efforts to repair the bars, 2 blackened strips of metal still remained where the handprints had been, in seeming defiance of attempts to cover up the story. Today, the gate has been painted gold, but the bars remained, with clear damage from the past repairs. Then, in 2019, one of the damaged bars disappeared altogether. Even those Southwest Siders who discredit Resurrection Mary know that much of what makes their culture special is wrapped up in the folds of her legendary white dress. And because of this, she is, even to non-believers, a priceless treasure. Just as she was to a witness in Kenan Hayes' novel Resurrection Mary, A Ghost Story, something precious. Whoever or whatever she is, to her I say, God bless you.